What's up, guys? Welcome. In today's video we're gonna talk about checkboxes. Checkboxes are very similar to radio buttons, and we're gonna talk about two different ways on how to get the state of a checkbox, because the problem here in most websites, if we actually do inspect on a checkbox, we see that value equals on, or it may be property like checked equals checked, or checked equals true, or something like that. But when we check this box, technically only then this value should say on, otherwise it should say off, right? But when I uncheck it, it still says on, it doesn't change. So this is a common problem between checkboxes and standard radio buttons. So today we're going to talk a little bit about not only how to support checkboxes, like how to click on them and how to get state, but more importantly how to get state when the state doesn't really change in the DOM. So, and we're not going to be using DOM for getting state. That's just to get that out, but I will show you guys how to add support for both. But driver does have a function. WebDriver has a function, very useful function, that we're actually going to utilize to get the state of this checkboxes here. So, but first, before we go into coding, let's actually go to console over here and try to execute a script to get the state of these buttons, because we are going to be using JavaScript to do that. So for now, let's just remember the ID of this checkbox. So home type 0, I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to go into console over here, and I'm going to say, I know for a fact that this website has JQuery, so we can actually use JQuery to access its elements. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say $, $, parentheses, in quotes, hashtag means ID, so I'm going to put hashtag for the ID, and I'm going to put the ID of this checkbox, which I got from the DOM over here. So now that I'm here and I have this jQuery statement, I can actually execute it, and jQuery, being nice, and it returns me the object for this button. Now if I look at this object, I can see a ton of different information that I wasn't able to see before, right? In the DOM, I only see 3 different attributes, that's it. But if I call this object through JavaScript, I can see a whole bunch of stuff related to this guy. Now there is one particular attribute over here, if you noticed, it says checked. Whoops, where'd you go? Where did you go? Come back, I need you in my life. There we go. So checked, and if we click over here, it says false, and it is in fact false. Now if I check it and I execute this statement again, I get the new element state, and I go back and look at the attributes here, looking for checked, should be somewhere up here. Now it says true. Okay, and we checked it, so checked attribute here, changed to true. So jQuery is not used in every single website, although I think 90% of websites do use jQuery. But just in case some website does not use jQuery, I will show you just a standard JavaScript call that you can do to actually get the state, checked state of a checkbox or a radio button, because this also applies for radio buttons. Okay, so the way we do it, like a standard JavaScript call, is we gonna use document, and then we gonna get element by ID, and then we're just gonna pass in the ID in here that interests us, and then we're gonna access attribute checked, and that will tell us whether the checkbox checked or not. So if we uncheck this, see, now it says false. You can do similar thing with jQuery as well. You can say is, so you don't have to look at the whole thing. You can say is checked, and then here it returns you false, and then here it will return you true. Okay, so there we go. So that's how you can get the state. Now that we know how to execute the JS calls, we're actually going to go into our code here, and I'll show you how to create a class to support that. So let's create a Python file, and we'll call it Checkbox Tutorial, and we're gonna call this class Checkbox, and then we're gonna create a constructor in here, and as always we're gonna pass in our driver and the Checkbox ID, and then we're gonna store it in an instance variables. So we're gonna say Checkbox ID, and then we're gonna do same thing for the driver, and then we actually gonna create the checkbox itself, the object using the driver. So we're gonna say driver find element by ID, and we're gonna pass in the checkbox ID right in here. So now that the constructor is done, we can go ahead and create our methods to kind of supporting methods that will return us the state of the element. So this is where we're gonna use our magic, JavaScript magic. So we're gonna call this method isEnabled, and actually we're gonna pass in, since I promised to show you how to do both, how to use the DOM elements on DOM attributes and how to do the JS call. So we're actually gonna make this method a little bit more dynamic, and we're gonna add a flag here to use JS, and we're going to set that flag to true, since in most cases we're going to be using JS, because in most cases developers don't update the HTML attributes for the checkboxes and the radio buttons. So we'll set that to true by default, and then we'll say if use JS. So if true for use JS, then we're going to return self driver, and then driver WebDriver has a function to execute script. So we're gonna use that function to execute the script. Now the script is going to be a little bit different. If you go in here, it's going to be just slightly different. So we're going to use the standard one over here. So we're going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it right in here. Now one thing I need to change is make sure I format the right ID. So I'm going to call the format method, and I'm going to reference the checkbox ID that we defined in the constructor here. And then if I execute it this way, it will actually return none, because we're not returning anything from the script. So we need to add return statement inside the script as well. So now if I execute this, it will return either true or false if it can find this element that we passed in here. So that's the JavaScript call. Now let's, assuming we're not using JavaScript, then we will return the regular, I've actually shown how to do this in the previous tutorial, but we'll do this again. So depending on what the value is of checkboxes, because as I said, this value, it could be not value, but like checked equals true or false, or checked equals checked, or value equals checked. So depending on the properties defined in your checkbox attributes, that's what you're gonna use here. For me, it's just on. That's the value, and the key for it is the value. So let's see, return on in self checkbox. So we're going to use our checkbox element to retrieve the attribute, and the attribute is the value. So we're going to call GetAttributeValue. So basically what that will do is it will return this value to us. So it's going to get this key, but it's going to get the value of the key, and that's what this call is going to return to us. So I'm checking whether on is in that string, and if it is, this statement right here is going to return true, otherwise it's going to return false. So then I'll know whether my checkbox is checked or not. So now that that's done, we can actually create a method to enable our checkbox, and this is going to be a little dynamic method as well, because we may want to enable or disable the checkbox, unlike radio buttons where you cannot really disable radio button explicitly. Checkbox you can. So because of that, we're gonna actually add one argument in here. We're gonna call it enable, just for readability purposes, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second. So here we're gonna say if, or then we're gonna self checkbox click. So what we're gonna put in here is basically we're gonna say if enable and not is enabled, or if not enable and self is enabled. So basically, if you want to enable the checkbox and the checkbox is not enabled, we're gonna click the checkbox. Or if we don't want to, enable, which means we want to disable the checkbox and the checkbox is enabled, then we're gonna click the checkbox. Okay. So otherwise, we don't really need this statement, but just for demonstration purposes, let's just print something. Let's say checkbox is already set to whatever the enable flag is, and then we're going to return self. Now we can actually go ahead and test our function. So what I'm going to do is actually go here and copy this part, so we can execute this file on its own. And I need this URL over here. Okay. Now, for me, for some reason, when I make a call to maximize the window, it doesn't do it. So for me, my browser actually comes up like this. But to get access to the checkbox, I actually need to click more, or when it expands, it moves this apartment condo loft part out to its own dropdown. Now when the browser is going to spawn, the dropdown is going to be actually here, so I actually need to click this dropdown. So that's what I'm going to do here right now. I'm going to say driver dot find element by ID, and click, and then let's find out what the ID is for more. So more toggle, so we'll just put that in, and then we define our checkboxes at this point. So let's see which checkboxes we have. Let's see, we got apartment, room, single, townhome. Okay, let's just, so apartment equals checkbox, we pass in the driver to it, and then we do ID for this checkbox. Now all of these checkboxes have similar IDs. It starts at 0, home type, and then home type. So we can just start incrementing these guys to 1, 2, and 3, and then I think we had room, right? Is that correct? Room, single, and townhome. Okay, single and townhome. So there we go. Now we have defined all of the checkboxes that we have in this dropdown. So now we need to test whether our methods work. So I'm actually gonna do a loop. So I'm going to create a variable to store all of the checkboxes that I just defined, to do a quick loop, so we don't have to copy and paste stuff. And I'm going to say for checkbox and checkboxes, and let's print checkbox is enabled, and it's going to use JS by default. And then we'll do checkbox enable. We'll set this to true, and then we'll try to enable it again, and then we'll try to disable it, and then we'll print whether it's disabled or enabled. So let's see if this works. Let's run it. There we go. We've got the browser. Doesn't look like it's working. Okay, I think there's a little bit of time delay when this page loads, so I think I'm gonna add like implicit wait. Let's do 10 seconds. See if that works. Alright, there we go. So let's see what happened here. So it opened the page, opened this menu, said it was unchecked, then it checked it, then I tried to check it again. Right, yep, try to check it again. It says it's already set to true, and then it unchecked it, and then we print the last state, which is false. So everything here is unchecked now. Let's remove this statement to uncheck, so everything should remain checked. If we execute the script now, every single checkbox should remain checked. Let's just make sure that works. Alright, looks like it's working. So there we go, guys. If this video helped you out, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Take care, guys.